welcome to Driving and Dragons. Today we begin the series that I have been discussing for some time on tabletop role-playing game design that is based on the Stephen Covey classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, I'm calling it 7 Keys to Effective TTRPG Design largely because 7 Habits is an actual trademark that has been aggressively protected, and I'd rather not have that discussion with Greg Newman over a series of YouTube videos. In case you were wondering, Greg is the attorney for Franklin Covey Company. As many of you know, I've been working for some time on a game system called 3612 that is built around the D30 and the dice which are divisible by 3. 3, 6, 12. Get it? While appearing on various interviews and streams, such as Pundit Encounters, Slice and Dice, Game Master Insight, and hosting people on my own Driving the Conversation stream, which is coming up here shortly, I've had lengthy discussions with game designers and publishers at almost every level of success. And the thought came to me that there are most certainly common elements that these diverse individuals share that lead to their success. So I started asking these designers and publishers, including several who I do not have a friendly relationship with, what they felt were the key habits critical to successfully designing a game, and for the most part, they were responsive and gave some great insight. I want to be clear up front. While sales is a consideration here, these videos and the keys themselves are not primarily about 7 ways to sell a bunch of TTRPG books. That isn't the success that I'm talking about. What I mean is success in completing a stable, viable game that effectively accomplishes the prime directives of the designer himself. To sum it up in a single example, my goal is to create a medieval fantasy role-playing game that offers a simplified experience without replacing half the rulebook with GM fiat. How do I set myself up to successfully accomplish this and end up with a product that in the end accomplishes that goal? These keys are not keys to general success. I might even say that if you aren't already practicing things like the 7 habits of highly effective people or other flavors of personal discipline, then these are not going to save you or your game. Think of this as an addition that takes someone who knows how to handle things, how to buckle down and finish a job, and guides them into the task-specific skills needed to make a game that delivers on its mission, whether 10 people buy it or 10 million people buy it. In this first video, I will run down the list of 7 keys and what they are, briefly. In subsequent videos, I'll dive into each one, how to implement it, why it is critical, and what it means to you in the game. For those merely curious, or with no aspirations of design, think of this as a litmus test that you can hold up to would-be indie designers that you see in your feed every day. Do they seem to possess these keys? The answer to that may very well determine the likelihood of that cool game idea that they had making it to market, or if it will actually be worth buying once it gets there. Remember, guys, ideas are free, and they're worth exactly that. So without further ado, here they are. 7 keys to effective TTRPG design. Key 1, be well read. Without a doubt, you must start from a place of being well read if you want to have any success in designing a game. Not just well read in the genre that you plan to design the game for, but well read across both fiction and nonfiction genres. You have to have a very strong understanding of the subject of your game and should be deeply well read in your specific genre. You also have to have a well-rounded perspective, and sometimes the answer to a puzzle you're trying to solve is right there on the bookshelf, gathering dust because it's something you haven't read. Key 2, know your niche. The second key seems like it's a continuation of the first. Of course you need to understand your niche. How can you make a fantasy game if you don't know fantasy? However, key 2 is deeper than that. You need to understand the core elements of your genre. You need to understand why they aim to evoke the specific emotions and feelings that they evoke. Perhaps even more importantly, you need to understand the kind of people and the personalities that make up the bulk of that genre's fans. To use a pretty charged example here, Cyberpunk gets away pretty easily with that genre's equivalent of the combat wheelchair, while Dungeons & Dragons suffers endlessly for it. The same can be said for the inclusion of what I'll simply refer to as alternative lifestyles. Why? Because cyberpunk is steeped in hedonism and anti-corporatism, while fantasy is a genre of heroes championing classic virtues and tradition. Now think of the kinds of people who generally hold those views and values in real life, and you can see why one player base rebelled while the other will more or less let it go unnoticed. Key 3. First think in settings, then in systems. If there's one of these keys that I personally missed and I'm now paying the price for, it's this one. The process must start with the setting, because the setting for your game informs every other decision in the process. Think about it. One of the best pieces of game master advice out there is to select the correct system for the kind of game you want to play. If you want epic heroic fantasy, you don't pull out Call of Cthulhu. Not only because you now have to adapt everything to fit your game, but because the very mechanics of Call of Cthulhu are poorly suited to that kind of play. It's the classic, how do I run horror in D&D problem. Sure, you can change things and make it work, but it's much better to just grab a game that's designed around horror. And this is why Key 3 is so important. When you make a decision about your fantasy role-playing game, you ask, what mechanics best fit the magic of my world? Not, how do I force my magic to these mechanics? Key 4, design, then refine. This one is likely the answer to 99% of the designers asking why it's year 7 of their development and they still don't even have the alpha playtest ready. Design your game. All of it. You should have a rough idea and a core concept of every part of your game before you start trying to polish it down into a finely tuned system. It's funny because the reason designers get stuck here is they see slop games hit the market after rigorous 10-hour work weeks for 6 months in development process and think, you know what? I don't want to just throw out some unplay-tested garbage like that. I'm going to make sure my game is ready. Then they spend 2 years working on the fine-tuning of a combat system for a game that doesn't even have the first word written about magic or social interactions or races or classes or even the equipment used in that combat system. Design your game. Playtest that rough draft while you go back and refine it. Key 5. The feel is more important than the real. This one's hard for a lot of designers. By nature, the kind of people who seriously get into developing games are the kind of people who are obsessed over details. But here's the problem. What feels true to life and what is actually realistic simulation of life are often not the same thing at all. And that disconnect kills the game for the players. The best example is one I use often, combat. In reality, there are dozens, hundreds, even thousands of variables that determine if and how a hard single punch lands. You want to realistically resolve an attempt to punch someone in the face? Get ready to roll a lot of dice to determine timing, positioning, weight distribution, angle, reaction time, and any number of other factors. But that isn't how combat feels. Combat is fast, chaotic, and dirty. The details are hazy, and it all happens in a flash. You don't simulate that feeling with 97 opposed rolls. You simulate it with abstractions that boil it into 1 or 2 rolls. Because the feeling of frantic chaos is far more important than the realistic calculation of probabilities. Key 6. Think abductively. Abductive reasoning is the ability to create a reasonable conclusion in the absence of information. When you come home and you see a broken window and your cash and jewelry are missing, you say, oh my God, they broke in through the window and stole my stuff. Now, sure, it is possible that they actually picked the lock and that the window was broken later by a gust of wind caused by a limb on a nearby tree that smacked into it, but that isn't the most logical conclusion given what's presented. You have to be able to make decisions without all the information if you want to complete your game in this current century. Abductive reasoning allows for you to make the best bet on how a mechanic will function in play, helping you get closer to the mark before playtesting gives you more data to improve that situation further. Key 7. Playtesting is infinite. The final key, and some may say the most important, is that playtesting is forever. It started before you ever even thought of designing a game. It started when you saw or created a house rule that served to make a table-level correction in a game that you were part of. That was the seed that started your design. It continues at every stage. Rough design, playtest. Singular mechanic, add it to a game that already exists and see how it works. Alpha, beta, and every other letter testing. And when you think you've tested enough and you put the game into the world, your customers are now playtesting the second edition. No plan survives contact with the enemy. No game survives contact with the playtesters or the customers. So there we have it, folks. The 7 keys to effective TTRPG design. There are a handful of bonus tips that I will post on Patreon and as member content before feeding them out later in shorts. But for now, that is the 7, and I will be working hard on the videos covering each one. Like this video if you found it interesting, add your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and do all the other YouTube stuff that helps the channel grow, and I will see you guys on the next one.